Du la mot u ka tu et voi. Toi esi sang tak mot ka chien kin deacon sat. Horror Stories Police, die, Nguyen Ban. Duok chia ton 12 fan nu ben u ka. Voi fong catch John kak kan YouTube kin di noiteng. Toi esi bat dao voi fan 1.de la ban nap dao tn. Duok viet bang tieng on. Tap trung veo vik tau ramot. Hook, hap danva dat nan mong chobian. Part 1. The echo in the empty station. The rain was a persistent, angry hiss against the grimy windows of the Black Creek Police Department. It was 2:17 a.m. Detective Ethan Bell, a man whose face had been chiseled by a decade of bad coffee and worse nights, sat alone at his steel-topped desk. He was hunched over a cold case file, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and forgotten hope. The silence of the precinct, a silence earned by the small town's near-zero crime rate, was unnerving. Black Creek wasn't known for much, just the monolithic, abandoned Cumberland Mill on the outskirts and the way the fog always seemed to cling to the surrounding pines like a shroud. Bell heard the elevator shudder to life, an ancient, metallic groan that felt too loud for the hour. He looked up, expecting the night shift janitor, Elias. The elevator doors clanged open. Standing there was a woman. She was soaked, her cheap plastic raincoat glistening under the fluorescent lights, and her hair, the color of wet sand, plastered to her forehead. She looked less like a victim and more like a ghost who had wandered out of the rain. She didn't move. She just stared at Bell, her eyes wide and unnaturally dark in the dim lighting. "Ma'am?" Bell asked, pushing his chair back. "Can I help you?" "The front desk is closed, you should have used the buzzer." Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Instead, she took one shaky step forward, her boots squeaking on the polished linoleum. I found it," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, like leaves dragging on pavement. "Found what, ma'am?" Bell was on his feet now, moving slowly around his desk. The woman, whose name tag on the coat pocket identified her as S. Riley, fumbled inside her coat. She pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped loosely in a muddy handkerchief. She dropped it onto Bell's desk. It landed with a dull, sickening thud. Bell unfolded the handkerchief. His blood ran cold. It wasn't a piece of evidence. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small, perfectly carved, wooden figurine. It was crudely made, clearly handmade, depicting a human figure with three unsettlingly detailed features: a wide, screaming mouth, two hollow eye sockets, and most disturbingly, no arms and no legs. It was simply a torso and a head. "What is this?" Bell asked, his voice low and tight. Riley didn't answer. She was looking past him, towards the hallway that led to the interrogation rooms. Her chest was heaving. "The box," she gasped, pointing a trembling finger. It was in the box. In the old mill, in the wall. And the echo. Before Bell could ask another question, a piercing, high-pitched noise ripped through the station. It wasn't a siren, a fire alarm, or a phone. It was an echoing, mechanical screech that seemed to originate from the air conditioning vents, yet felt like it was inside Bell's skull. Riley whimpered, clutching her ears, and then, without warning, she bolted. Not toward the door, but deeper into the station, down the dark hallway she had been staring at. Bell shouted, "Hey! Stop!" and lunged after her, adrenaline flooding his system. He chased her through the swinging doors into the rear offices. He saw her silhouette flash past the record storage room. He rounded the corner, skidding on the slick floor, and saw a door slam shut at the far end of the hall. It was the door to the unused evidence lockup, a room that hadn't been opened in 5 years. Bell raced to the door, his hand slamming onto the heavy steel handle. Locked. He pounded on the door. "Riley. Open up. You can't be in there." Silence. The only sound was the incessant drumming of the rain and a faint, rhythmic scratching sound from inside the locked room. Bell stepped back, drawing his service weapon, feeling a prickle of genuine fear crawl up his spine. This was wrong. All of it. He radioed dispatch, a raw command. "Unit 3 to dispatch. I need Elias and Chief Hayes down here, now. Emergency. Evidence lockup, main station. And run a check on A.S. Riley in a plastic coat." Bell lowered his weapon, his eyes fixed on the door. The rhythmic scratching stopped, and then, clear and crisp through the thick steel, came a sound that froze the marrow in his bones. It was the distinct, high-pitched clang of the wooden figurine, the one now sitting on his desk, being dropped onto a hard, metal floor. But the sound was not coming from his desk. It was coming from inside the locked room. Say nu the now nu toi teep tuc voi fan tu, noi bel fi tim catch veo fong lock up vakem fod gi de zara voi s, Riley, don moi ket noi man moi voi Cumberland Mill. Follow up 1. Tu et voi. Toi se teep tuc nai voi fan tu qua carchuyen. Part 2. The lockup and the unseen box. Detective Ethan Bell's hand was still wrapped around the cold steel of his service weapon, his knuckles white. The adrenaline from the chase had curdled into a cold, metallic dread. The sound of the wooden figurine dropping had been unmistakable, a perfect echo of the one sitting miles away on his desk. He pressed his ear against the heavy, sealed door of the evidence lockup. Nothing. Only the quiet drone of the precinct's old ventilation system. She can't be in there. It's impossible. The evidence room key was held by Chief Hayes, secured in a separate lockbox. The only other way in was through a near-impenetrable steel ventilation shaft that ran along the ceiling, and that hadn't been serviced in years. Bell backed away, eyes scanning the dark hallway. This wasn't a criminal act. This was a psychological break, or something far stranger. Just then, the outer door thunked open. Chief Hayes, a massive man whose perpetual scowl could stop a runaway truck, stormed in, followed by Elias, the rail-thin night janitor, who clutched a mop like a security blanket. Bell, what in the hell is going on? Dispatch said you had an emergency, Hayes growled, stopping short when he saw Bell's drawn weapon. Where's the suspect? She's in there, Chief. Bell pointed to the lockup door. A woman named S. Riley. She came in panicked, dropped this on my desk, and ran straight into this room. Hayes blinked, completely nonplussed. That lock hasn't been changed since '08. She can't just run in there. Bell lowered his weapon slightly. I saw her, Chief. I saw the door slam. And right after, I heard the sound of that thing dropping inside. Bell gestured toward his open office door down the hall. Hayes sighed, reaching for his utility belt. You've been staring at the Miller case too long, Ethan. You're hearing things. He produced a heavy keyring and unlocked the reinforced steel lockbox mounted on the wall. After a series of rapid clicks, he pulled out the single, large, brass key for the lockup. He inserted the key, turned it, and the heavy tumbler shifted with a grinding finality. Bell stood ready, weapon raised, Elias peering over Hayes' shoulder, his eyes wide. Hayes pulled the door open. The stench hit them immediately, a choking wave of ozone, burnt wiring, and something sickly sweet, like decaying flower petals. The room was completely empty. It was a windowless, concrete box, lined on 3 sides by heavy steel shelving. There were no vents large enough for a person to fit through. No crawl spaces. No back doors, and no S. Riley. Hayes flipped the light switch. The overhead fluorescent bulb flickered 3 times before bathing the room in harsh, cold light. Well, Bell? Hayes demanded, running a hand over his face. Where is she? Bell stepped inside, ignoring Hayes, his gaze sweeping the shelves. The room was immaculate. The steel floor was pristine, but then he saw it, tucked away on the top shelf, partially obscured by a stack of old evidence forms, was a small, crudely fashioned wooden box. It was dark, stained wood, about the size of a shoebox, and it was tied shut with a length of brittle, rotting twine. It was definitely not standard evidence issue. Bell reached up and carefully pulled it down. The wood felt cold and strangely oily. Chief, look at this. This wasn't here, Bell said, holding it out. Hayes took the box, turning it over skeptically. A box. Great. So the woman who supposedly evaporated also had time to hide a novelty container. As Hayes spoke, Bell knelt down, running his hand over the steel floor where he estimated the sound had come from. His fingers brushed against something tiny, something impossibly small. He picked it up. It was a piece of the object that S. Riley had left on his desk, a minute, sliver of dark, unfinished wood, the kind of wood a hobbyist or an amateur carver might use. Bell stood up, his eyes now fixed on the wooden box. In Hayes's hands. Open it, Chief, Bell said, his voice quiet. Hayes hesitated, then jammed his thumbnail under the brittle twine. It snapped easily. He lifted the heavy wooden lid. Inside the box, lying perfectly centered on a bed of faded, blood-red velvet, was the twin of the figurine on Bell's desk. It was the same perfectly carved, armless, legless torso and head. The same wide, screaming mouth, and it was vibrating. A deep, low-frequency hum resonated from the figure, barely audible, yet palpable in the air, making the hairs on the back of Bell's neck stand up. The sweet, sickly smell in the room intensified instantly. Attached to the base of the wooden figure was a tiny, folded slip of paper. Bell snatched it out. The note was written in a shaky hand. The ink bled slightly from moisture, but the message was clear and stark. The echo has a name. It's in the mill's bones. And now it's looking for Riley. Bell looked up at Hayes, whose face was pale under the harsh light. The rhythmic scratching sound returned, not from inside the room this time, but seemingly from the ceiling vent directly above the box. Elias, the janitor, let out a choked sound, pointing a trembling, mop-free hand at the wall, just above the empty shelf where the box had been resting. A fresh, thin line of dark, wet moisture was seeping down the concrete wall, forming a single, perfect droplet before running down the clean, white paint. It smelled distinctly of copper and iron. It smelled of blood. Trong Fan 3. Bell se fi doi mat voi jiam dak kan sat ha I gi va bat dao ju tra Cumberland Mill, noi bien bat dao va noi on ta se tim thay man wad ao tnve lich su den toi qua ti tram. Follow up 2. Tuet voi. Teep Theo Lafen 3. Part 3. The cold case and the mill's bones. Chief Hayes slammed the evidence lockup door shut, the resounding clang echoing the chilling drop of the unseen figurine. He grabbed the wooden box and the blood-soaked note from Bell, his usual composure fractured by the sight of the blood on the wall and the vibrating figure. Elias, sanitize that section and forget everything you just saw. This never happened, Hayes commanded, his voice trembling only slightly. He looked at Bell, his eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. Bell, in my office. Now. The chief's office was small, dominated by a large mahogany desk and an oppressive silence. Hayes tossed the box onto the desk, its contents rattling softly. Explain Riley, Hayes demanded. I ran the name. Sarah Riley. A woman with a history of minor drug offenses, living in a dilapidated trailer near the Cumberland Mill site. She was reported missing 3 days ago by her parole officer. No plastic coat mentioned. Bell leaned forward, running a hand through his already messy hair. She was here, Chief. I spoke to her. She was terrified. She said she found the box in the mill's wall. And she said something about an echo. An echo. Hayes scoffed, though the dismissal lacked conviction. Look, Ethan. Sarah Riley is a paranoid druggie who probably hallucinated her way in here, dropped her little toy, and ran out the back door while you were distracted. The blood. Old pipe leak, probably rusted water. It smelled like copper, Chief. Fresh, Bell countered, pointing at the wooden figurine now sitting innocently on the desk. And that thing didn't run out. I checked the back exit. It was double-locked from the inside. She vanished in that room. And the minute she pointed to the hallway, I heard that screech, a high-frequency tone, not unlike a recording. Bell walked over to a steel filing cabinet near the wall. He unlocked the top drawer and pulled out the dusty, brown file he had been reviewing hours earlier. The screech, the mill's bones, it connects to this, Bell said, dropping the Miller case file onto Hayes's desk. The Miller case was an unsolved disappearance from 1988. 7-year-old Thomas Miller vanished while playing near the abandoned mill. No body, no evidence, just a pair of muddy sneakers found near the creek. The mill was shut down in '85, 3 years before Tommy disappeared. But look at the evidence log. Bell tapped the faded sheet. The only piece of physical evidence recovered was a single item found in Tommy's treehouse, 3 months after he disappeared. Bell flipped the page, revealing an old, grainy photo. Hayes stared. The photo showed a small, crude object, a wooden figurine. Armless. Legless. The spitting image of the one now on his desk, and the one found in the lockup. The original figurine was lost in the transfer to state police back in '89. It was documented, but never physically returned, Hayes mumbled, the blood draining from his face. Bell, this is just a coincidence. A shared motif. No, Chief. It's an original hook. Look at the note S. Riley gave us. The echo has a name. It's in the mill's bones. What if the mill isn't just a location, but a container? The original Miller search focused on the surrounding woods and the river. No one ever searched the foundations. Bell stood up. I'm taking a unit to the mill. We need to find this box Riley mentioned, the one in the wall. If she's telling the truth, and if she vanished because of this echo, then the answer is out there. Hayes looked at the two identical, screaming wooden figurines on his desk, one left by a vanished woman 3 days after she went missing, the other linked to a boy who disappeared 37 years ago. The sweet, cloying smell from the lockup still clung to the air. Hayes finally conceded with a weary sigh. Fine. Take Officer Dana Chen. And stick to the exterior. Do not go inside the main structure. It's condemned and unstable. Any sign of trouble, you call me immediately. An hour later, Bell and Officer Chen were parked outside the Cumberland Mill. It was a monstrous silhouette against the moonless sky, its brickwork black with mold and age, its colossal smokestacks pointing at the angry clouds. The only sound was the incessant wind whistling through the broken window panes, a sound that could easily be mistaken for a distant, mournful whimper. Bell's flashlight beam cut through the thick fog, illuminating the crumbled retaining wall near the old loading dock, the wall where Sarah Riley claimed to have found the box. According to the records, this area was mostly used as a trash heap for old machinery parts, Chen noted. Her breath misting, Bell moved closer to the thick, root-damaged stone foundation. The stones were covered in decades of grime and ivy. He paused, lowering his light. Look at this. Chen approached. A section of the ivy-covered wall, about 5 feet up, had been recently disturbed. The ivy had been carelessly ripped away, and there were fresh chisel marks in the old mortar. Someone had definitely been digging here. Riley was here, Bell confirmed, running a gloved finger over the cold, damp stone. He pushed hard on a loose, rectangular stone. It slid inward slightly. He reached in and pulled the heavy rock away, revealing a dark, shallow void in the foundation wall. Chen gasped softly. Tucked into the hole was a third item, covered in wet sawdust and mud. It wasn't a box. It was a small, grimy cassette tape recorder. Bell carefully pulled it out. It was an old model, the kind that ran on C batteries. The power light was blinking red. It was still recording. He pressed the stop button, then rewind, then pressed play. The tape played back a sequence of horrifying sounds, the frantic, labored breathing of S. Riley, the scrape of the chisel on the mortar, a terrified sob, and then a deafening, metallic screech, the same sound Bell had heard in the station. The screech lasted for 5 full seconds, and then, immediately following it, the tape captured a single, clear voice. It was S. Riley, but her voice was different now, low, guttural, and inhumanly calm. The echo is here. It wants the pieces. And it's hungry for the source. Then came a final, terrifying sound, a sound of something large, wooden, and heavy being dropped onto concrete, followed by silence. Trong Fan 4, Bell Se Phi Fan Tich Don Bang Nai Va Di Sao Han Veo Lich Su Qua Cumberland Mill, Tim Kim Ongwan Ma Riley did a cap. On Ta Se Fat Hien Ramot Chi Teat by Lang Quain Ve Kien Truck Qua Mill, Mot Du Gi Du De Bai Chan Vui Dui Mong Qua No. Follow up 3. Tu et Voi. Toi Se Teat Tuc Nai Voi Part 4. Part 4. The architect's oversight and the source. Detective Bell stared at the small, spinning reels of the cassette recorder. The wind howled through the mill's broken superstructure, sounding exactly like the dying scream S. Riley had just recorded. She was still recording when she found it, Officer Chen whispered, her face pale in the light of the tape player. The screech, and then that voice. That wasn't right, Detective. That wasn't just fear. It's the echo, Chen. She said it wants the pieces. And it's hungry for the source, Bell murmured, pressing stop. He wrapped the recorder in an evidence bag. We need to figure out what the mill's bones are hiding. And we need to find out why this specific wooden figure is the key. Back at the station, the two figurines, the one from Bell's desk and the one from the lockup, were placed side by side under forensic lights. Hayes had been convinced enough by the recorder that he was now pacing. Bell presented the two pieces of evidence found at the mill, the tape recorder and the fresh chisel marks. "Chief, I ran the blueprints on the Cumberland mill," Bell said, spreading out a series of yellowed architectural drawings. The mill was famous for its rapid construction. The original owners, the Hawthorne family, were obsessed with getting the plant operational before the winter of '85. He pointed to a large, rectangular structure on the drawings labeled Primary Hydropump Station. The original plans called for this pump station to be built right on the creek bed, a standalone structure. But they hit an unexpected snag, a hidden underground spring that flooded the excavation site repeatedly. Chen leaned closer, tracing a line on the drawing with her finger. "So they moved the pump station?" "No. They buried it," Bell stated grimly. To save time and money, they simply sealed the flooded pump house, a fully built concrete and steel structure, and poured the main factory's massive foundation directly on top of it. It's literally buried in the mill's bones. Hayes looked up from the wooden figurines. "You're saying there's a sealed, underground room, an echo chamber, under the main floor?" "Exactly. It's not on the current structural diagrams. The only way down would have been the original access shaft, which they sealed off with a concrete cap in the main boiler room floor." Bell tapped a tiny, faded label near the sealed structure, "Echo chamber, access point closed." Bell turned back to the figurines. "These figures are crudely carved, handmade, likely by someone who worked at the mill. But why no arms or legs?" Chen looked thoughtful. "They look like a sacrifice, detective. Something designed to be contained, immobilized. Or maybe they're just pieces of a larger whole," Bell countered. He picked up the one from the lockup and noticed something on the underside, obscured by dirt. He carefully brushed it away. Engraved deeply into the base of the wooden figure was a single letter, C. He checked the one S Riley had originally dropped on his desk. Engraved on its base was a clear A. "They're marked," Bell announced. "A and C. If they're parts of a series, where are B and D?" Just then, dispatch crackled over the radio, urgency in the operator's voice. "Unit 3, we have an active break-in alarm at the Black Creek Historical Society and Archive. Code 3. Bell and Hayes exchanged a look. The Historical Society was a small, dusty building filled with documents and artifacts related entirely to the town's founding, mostly centered around the old Cumberland mill owners, the Hawthorns. "That's B&D, Chief." "Let's move," Bell ordered, grabbing his coat. 5 minutes later, Bell, Hayes, and Chen were inside the dark, cavernous Historical Society. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and wood preservative. A small, glass display case near the back was smashed, pieces of historical pottery scattered across the floor. Bell's flashlight swept over the room, pausing on the open door of the locked archive room. "Check the security logs, Chen. See what's missing," Hayes ordered, drawing his sidearm. Chen rushed to the main desk. Bell, meanwhile, moved toward the archive. Something was wrong. The air here was vibrating. The low, unsettling hum he'd heard from the figurine in the lockup was present throughout the room. Louder now, inside the archive, rows of filing cabinets stood sentinel. One cabinet, labeled Hawthorne Estate, Mill Deeds, was wide open. Chen ran in, pointing at the security screen on her phone. "Detective. The last footage captured before the intruder disabled the system, right when the alarm went off. It shows the figure. Not S. Riley, a man. Tall, skeletal thin, and wearing an old, oil-stained mill worker's uniform. He's carrying a large tool bag." Bell was now looking at the open filing cabinet. 2 file folders were missing. The first was labeled, Mill Worker Payroll, 1985 Final. The second, most crucially, was labeled, Hawthorne Architectural Supplements, Foundation. Then Bell saw the final piece of the puzzle. Tucked into the far corner of the open file drawer. It was a small, canvas, mill-issued tool bag. And sticking out of the top, perfectly carved and clearly labeled with the letters on their bases, were the missing wooden figurines, B and D, but they were different. These two had thick, dark, knotted hair meticulously carved into their heads, and their wide, screaming mouths were filled with dozens of impossibly sharp, tiny teeth, and as Belle reached for the bag, the low hum intensified dramatically. The air grew ice-cold, and a voice, not S. Riley's, but a dry, rattling whisper that seemed to speak from the documents themselves, echoed in the silent archive, "You have 3. I have 1. The source remembers the names. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the archive into absolute darkness. Simultaneously, a deafening, metallic scrape ripped through the floor directly under Belle's feet, like steel grinding on concrete. The man in the mill uniform was still in the building. And he was very close. Trong Fan 5, Belle Se Phi Doi Mat Voi Nuoi Dan Ong Bien Trong Bo Dong Phuc Mill, Tim Ra. The source, Va Kam Fa Moalini Jua Kak Tsong Nan Mat Tich Nam 1985 Va Kak Men Gep Go. Follow-up 4. Tua Kong Duok Lap Trin Da Ho Tro Vik Du. Follow-up 5. Tuet Voi. Chung Ta Se Teep Tuc Voi Part 5. Part 5. The worker and the missing pieces. The pitch black of the Historical Society's archive was suffocating. The air was electric, charged with the bone-shaking hum that now felt like a localized vibration. Detective Bell immediately dropped to a crouch, his flashlight beam cutting a desperate swath across the floor where the tool bag lay. Chen. Lights. What's the status of the suspect? Bell barked into his radio, his heart hammering against his ribs. Officer Chen's voice crackled back, tight with strain. Circuit tripped. I saw a shadow near the back exit just before the power died. Chief Hayes is heading that way now. Bell had only one priority, the tool bag. He lunged forward, snatching the heavy canvas sack containing the terrifying new figurines, B and D. As his fingers closed around the bag, a high-frequency metallic clang sounded right behind the filing cabinet, followed by the heavy, rhythmic thump of boots moving fast. He was cornered. Bell swung his flashlight beam around. Standing between the tall rows of filing cabinets, silhouetted against a sliver of weak moonlight from a high window, was the figure Chen described, the skeletal, tall man in the oil-stained, outdated Cumberland Mill uniform. The man wore a heavy leather apron, and in his hand, he carried an antique, heavy sledgehammer. It dragged lightly on the floor, leaving a faint groove in the polished wood. The man didn't speak. He just tilted his head, the deep shadows making his face an indistinguishable void, and took a slow, deliberate step toward Bell. Police. Drop the hammer. Bell shouted, bringing his service weapon up, the sound of the gunshot echoing deafeningly in his mind before it was even fired. The figure ignored him. It lifted the hammer slowly, deliberately, and with a grunt that sounded more like grinding metal than human effort, brought the heavy head down onto the nearest filing cabinet. The impact was tremendous. Steel shrieked and buckled. The papers inside the cabinet erupted like confetti. The vibration nearly knocked Bell off his feet. Bell fired. Twice, the sharp, concussive blasts were deafening. Both rounds struck the center mass of the mill worker's chest. The impact threw him back against the adjacent cabinet with enough force to dent the steel, and he slid to the floor in a heap. Bell rushed forward, adrenaline overriding caution. He kicked the sledgehammer away. The men lay motionless, the uniform dark and thick with oil. But there was no blood. Absolutely none. Bell shone his light on the chest where the bullets hit. The heavy leather apron and the thick cotton uniform were torn, but beneath them, the worker's skin was not visible. Instead, there was a layer of what looked like hardened, black pitch or tar, scarred and glossy, like old, solidified oil. The bullet holes were small, clean indentations in the substance, with no exit wounds. Bell leaned in, checking for a pulse, pressing his fingers to the thick, cold neck. Suddenly, the worker's head snapped up. A pair of wide, vacant, yellow eyes that seemed to glow with a sickly internal light, locked onto Bell's. The man's mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing teeth that were unnaturally long and stained dark, not unlike the teeth carved into the B and D figurines. A voice, the same dry, rattling whisper from the archive, spoke directly into Bell's ear, though the worker's lips barely moved. He hides it. The source is the memory. The memory must be silenced. The worker's hand shot out, grabbing Bell's wrist with inhuman strength. Bell roared, wrenching his arm free, stumbling back, dropping his flashlight. It rolled away, leaving them in darkness again, illuminated only by the faint, eerie yellow glow of the worker's eyes. Just as the worker started to rise, Chief Hayes burst through the archive door, his own weapon drawn, followed by Chen, who had managed to rig up a temporary emergency light. The sudden influx of light and noise seemed to break the creature's focus. It hesitated, then turned and fled, sprinting toward a small, broken side window that Bell hadn't noticed. It slammed itself through the pane with a sound of shattering glass and wood, disappearing into the night. Hayes rushed over to Bell. "Are you hit, Ethan? What in God's name was that?" Bell was breathing hard, staring at the shattered window. "That wasn't a man, Chief. It was a machine. Or something covered in tar. No blood. It was trying to get the figures back. It mentioned a memory and a source that needs to be silenced." Bell opened the tool bag. He held up the new figurines, B and D. "The source of the memory has to be in those missing files," Chen pointed out, gesturing to the open cabinet. "Payrolls and architectural supplements." The worker was looking for his own files, Chief. "The files of the men who built the mill." Hayes, visibly shaken, nodded. "Chen, get the forensics unit down here. Bell, you and I are going back to the station. We're putting these 4 pieces together, and we're figuring out what the name of that worker is." Back at the precinct, the 4 wooden pieces, A, B, C, D, were lined up on Bell's desk. A and C were smooth, simple, screaming torsos. B and D were the grotesque, hairy, sharp-toothed versions. "These aren't just random figures," Bell theorized, looking at the patterns. "I think they represent 4 people. 4 parts of the echo." And the payroll file the creature took likely contained the key name. Bell looked at the few remaining documents in the open payroll cabinet. He found an internal memo, dated 1985, from the construction foreman, Samuel Elias, no relation to the janitor. It concerned an unauthorized excavation incident. Memo subject: unauthorized excavation/personnel removal date 11/12/1985. 4 workers: A. Carter, B. Davies, C. Finch, and D. Holt, violated safety protocols and were subsequently involved in an incident near the sealed pump station foundation. Due to the sensitive nature of the project timeline, personnel were removed immediately and their employment terminated. All relevant records placed under seal. Bell pointed to the memo, his voice tight with realization. A. Carter, B. Davies, C. Finch, D. Holt. The initials matched the figurines. These 4 workers went down into the echo chamber and were removed, meaning they probably died and were sealed up down there, 37 years ago. And one of them, the mill worker, is now walking around looking for his file. Hayes finished, running a hand over the cold wood of figurine B. "Yes. And he said, I have 1, you have 3, Bell continued. He has one of the 4 original workers' files. He's missing the others, which is why he broke into the archive. He needs the full memory to silence the source." Bell looked at the 4 figurines, their blank wooden eyes staring back. "Chief, the only file that creature was truly missing was the Hawthorne Architectural Supplements Foundation file. The one detailing the sealed pump station. The file the mill worker failed to take must contain the key to finding the source," Hayes confirmed. Bell opened the B and D figures tool bag again, checking for anything else the worker might have overlooked. He found a piece of stiff, laminated cardstock tucked deep inside. It was a 1985 Cumberland Millwork, Idaho, partially burnt and covered in tar. The name on the ID was B. Davies, and on the back of the ID, written crudely in pencil, was a single, cryptic instruction: "The source sings to the highest shelf. Only the broken bell can hear." Bell looked up at the clock in the precinct. It was 4 a.m. In less than 3 hours, the sun would rise. He knew exactly where the creature was heading next. "The source is in the mill, Chief. I need that architectural supplement file now. And I need the address for the nearest bell tower in Black Creek," Bell said, his mind racing. "Davies is looking for a bell, and the mill worker is coming back to the mill. Trong Fan 6, Bell Vachan Se Quay Tro Lai Mil, Sudong Man. Moi Ve, Chuang Bai Vo, Va Kak Ben Thiat Kuda Tim Loi Veo Echo Chamber by Nim Fong, Trong Kai Bai B. Davies, Hey Thursday to Chiem Huong Ta, San Lung. Follow-up 6. Tuet Voi. Chung Ta Se Teep Tuc Voi Part 6. Part 6. The broken bell and the sealed gate. Chief Hayes was grim-faced as he handed Bell the Hawthorne Architectural Supplements, Foundation file. It was a single, heavy scroll of parchment, stiff with age. Chen ran the local history records, Hayes said, pointing to the scrolling map on the monitor. There's only one structure in Black Creek with a bell tower that's confirmed to be broken or deactivated, the old Black Creek grain silo, a mile south of the mill. It was decommissioned after a lightning strike in '91 melted the copper wiring in the bell mechanism. It's been silent ever since. Bell nodded, rolling up the scroll. Davies' note says, the source sings to the highest shelf. Only the broken bell can hear. He's directing us to the source, not the bell itself. The mill is where the 4 workers were sealed up. The source has to be there. Then you're going back, Hayes stated, pulling his jacket on. I'm calling in state police backup for a full perimeter sweep of the mill and the silo. But it'll take them 2 hours to get here. You have to move now, before Davies does. Bell and Officer Chen arrived back at the desolate Cumberland mill under the cold, pre-dawn light. The wind seemed to carry not just moisture, but the faint, pervasive scent of ozone and something metallic, the same sickening smell from the evidence lockup. They bypassed the loading dock and headed directly to the condemned main factory structure, ignoring Hayes's previous order. The sealed access cap should be on the main boiler room floor, Bell said, unfolding the architectural supplement scroll. This is the only diagram that shows the depth and precise location of the echo chamber underneath. The boiler room was a massive, oppressive space, its ceiling 3 stories high, filled with hulking, rusting machinery and thick layers of black soot. Bell shone his flashlight on the floor, following the coordinates on the diagram. They finally stopped near a monstrous, defunct pressure valve, its bronze surface green with corrosion. Here, Bell confirmed, tracing the floor with his boot. The concrete was clean here, but a faint, nearly invisible seam ran in a square shape, indicating where the concrete cap had been poured to seal the pump station access shaft. It's too thick to break open, Detective, Chen said, tapping the floor with her flashlight. It must be 1.5 feet of reinforced concrete. We're not breaking it. We're opening it, Bell replied, his eyes scanning the surrounding machinery. The original construction notes on this scroll show a deactivation sequence for the buried pump station. It was designed to be accessed again in the event of a catastrophic flood. Bell read the faded annotations, deactivation sequence triggered remotely by the harmonic bell's terminal frequency. The harmonic bell. Chen whispered. It wasn't a standard bell, Chen. It was a custom-made acoustic frequency generator, designed to stabilize the subterranean spring, Bell explained, pointing to a small, hand-drawn diagram on the scroll. But the Hawthorne family couldn't find a way to power it locally without a huge energy cost, so they rigged it to a remote power source, the Black Creek grain silo's electrical grid, the only nearby grid strong enough. Bell looked at Chen, his eyes alight with grim understanding. The mill worker isn't looking for the source at the silo. He's trying to repower the acoustic generator, the harmonic bell, at the silo, to open this door. But the silo's bell mechanism is broken, Chen countered. No, the bell tower is broken. The electrical terminal for the mill's harmonic generator is what's located there. If he repairs the terminal and activates the silo's powerful main grid, it will send the high-frequency charge directly to the mill, activating the remote sequence and opening the floor cap, Bell said. Just then, a sound echoed. From the far end of the boiler room, the slow, heavy thump of the sledgehammer dragging across the concrete. B. Davies was here. Bell immediately grabbed his radio. Hayes. Davies is at the mill. He's trying to remotely activate the harmonic bell via the grain silo's terminal. We need a team at the silo now to cut the main power grid. A burst of static was the only reply. The massive, defunct machinery in the boiler room seemed to be interfering with the signal. Davies emerged from the shadows, his uniform glistening with what might have been residual tar or just wet, black oil. He stopped 50 feet away, the massive sledgehammer resting on his shoulder. His yellow eyes fixed on Bell, the source sings to the highest shelf, the dry whisper rattled in the air. The four must be one again. Davies suddenly dropped the sledgehammer and reached into his belt. He pulled out the missing mill worker payroll file, tore it in half, and let the pieces flutter to the floor. Then, he raised his empty hand, a hand that looked strangely elongated and powerful, and pointed straight up. Bell looked up. On a high, rickety metal gantry, a service platform that hadn't been accessed in decades, sat a small, tarnished brass bell. It was cracked and discolored, perched precariously near the ceiling. The broken bell can hear, that's the source, Chen. The broken bell. Bell shouted. Davies began to advance, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Bell and Chen opened fire, their rounds thudding uselessly into his tar-hardened chest. The worker didn't even flinch, he just continued his slow, terrifying approach. Go. Bell yelled at Chen, providing cover fire. Get to that bell. If the harmonic bell is about to activate, the sound waves will resonate through the source and open the floor. Chen, realizing the terrifying truth, that they couldn't stop Davies, only stop the sequence, scrambled up the nearest rusty iron ladder leading to the gantry. As Chen reached the top, Davies broke into a fast, unnatural sprint, closing the distance between himself and Bell in terrifying strides. Bell retreated, firing his last round, but it had no effect. He dropped the empty weapon. Davies was upon him. The worker's massive, tar-covered hand clamped around Bell's neck with crushing force, lifting him clear off the floor. Bell choked, struggling against the inhuman grip. Davies' yellow eyes were inches from Bell's, the rancid smell of stale oil overwhelming. The whisper came, chillingly close. A. Carter's file. D. Holt's file, they are the names of the memory. The four must be one in the source. Suddenly, a high-pitched, almost musical whine began to fill the boiler room. The massive, dead pressure valve next to Bell began to vibrate violently. The acoustic frequency had arrived from the silo. Chen, now on the platform, was struggling to pull the rusted, broken brass bell from its mount. As the whine intensified, the floor beneath Bell's feet began to shake. The sealed concrete cap started to glow with an eerie, internal white light. Davies screamed, a terrible, high-pitched shriek of pure rage and pain that didn't sound like a man at all. He threw Bell aside like a rag doll. The concrete cap was cracking, splitting. A line of thick, black liquid oozed up from the fissures, and then, the high-pitched whine reached a deafening crescendo. The square of concrete in the floor was instantly vaporized, disintegrating into dust, revealing a dark, square hole into the sealed echo chamber beneath. A terrible, wet slurping sound rose from the darkness. Davies turned his back on Bell, his eyes fixed on the pit. He took a running jump and plunged headlong into the darkness. As the echoes of his fall faded, Chen, breathing heavily, pulled the broken bell free and hurled it into the abyss. The minute the brass bell hit the water at the bottom, the high-frequency whine vanished. The black seepage stopped, silence returned, broken only by Bell's ragged breathing. He crawled to the edge of the pit and peered down into the Stygian darkness of the echo chamber. He saw nothing, but the smell, the sweet, metallic, sickly smell, was overwhelming. Then, from the absolute blackness, a voice rose. It was Thomas Miller's voice, the 7-year-old boy missing since 1988, singing a soft, tuneless, chilling lullaby. Trong Fen 7, Bell Phi Doi Mat Voi Jiam Dak Kan Sat Hoi Gi Lon Nua, Jai Ma En Hung Gi Da Zay Ra Trong Echo Chamber, Va Kem Fa Ra Mwalini Kung Keep Jua En Hung Sung Nan Va Vu Mat Tich Qua. Thomas Miller. Follow-up 7. That was intense. Here is part 7, where Bell and Chen must face the skeptical authorities and the chilling implications of what happened in the echo chamber. Part 7, the chamber's water and the boys' lullaby. The arrival of the state police was a whirlwind of blinding floodlights and skeptical authority. Detective Bell and Officer Chen stood outside the gaping, black hole in the boiler room floor, exhausted, smelling of ozone, tar, and that lingering, sickening metallic sweetness. Chief Hayes, relieved to see them alive, took immediate command, but the atmosphere was thick with disbelief. Captain Reynolds, the lead state police investigator, was a rigid man whose entire career was built on tangible, measurable evidence. Let me be clear, Detective Bell, Reynolds stated, pointing a gloved hand at the massive hole. You are telling me that a missing drug suspect, a missing child from 1988, 4 long-dead mill workers, and a man covered in roofing tar who you shot twice without effect, are all connected to this hole that opened when a remote acoustic signal was triggered from a broken grain silo. Bell ignored the sarcasm, pointing to the architectural supplement scroll. The hole leads to the echo chamber. An old, sealed pump station. The worker, B. Davies, went down there. And before he did, we heard Thomas Miller's voice, the missing boy, singing. Reynolds looked at Hayes, who simply wiped his brow and shrugged. The kid's voice, Captain. I heard the recording from the radio, too. It was faint, but it was there. The state police lowered heavy-duty submersible floodlights and a camera into the echo chamber. The feed immediately displayed on a monitor. The chamber was roughly 20 feet square, its walls thick, water-stained concrete. The lower half was completely flooded with dark, stagnant water that shimmered under the light. They could clearly see the rusted remnants of the original hydropumps and piping. No body, no movement, Reynolds announced flatly, watching the feed. Just water and junk. No sign of Davies or the boy. Zoom in on the water, Captain, Bell insisted. Look at the surface. The camera zoomed in. The surface of the water was completely motionless, yet constantly rippling with tiny, subtle vibrations, like an underwater drum. It's the residue of the harmonic bell's frequency, still resonating in the enclosure, Bell theorized. And the water itself, it's the source. It absorbed whatever happened to those 4 workers and Thomas Miller. Chen, who had been quietly reviewing the old Miller case file, suddenly spoke up. Detective, look at the original police sketches of Thomas Miller's disappearance. They found his sneakers near the creek, remember? The police assumed he drowned or was taken. But read the secondary medical report on the sneakers. She pointed to a line of text. Fibers found inside the left sneaker showed trace contamination with Arachis hypogea, peanut, residue and high concentrations of industrial-grade copper sulfate. Copper sulfate was the main chemical preservative used in the Cumberland Mills pipe maintenance, Chen explained. And peanuts were Thomas Miller's favorite snack. He didn't drown in the creek. He went into the mill, and he went deep enough to be near the pump station, near the copper sulfate contamination. Bell looked at the dark water in the echo chamber feed. He didn't drown in the water, Chen. He was swallowed by it. Suddenly, the tranquil rippling on the surface of the echo chamber's water stopped. The surface became perfectly smooth, like black glass, and then, a large, dark air bubble, about the size of a human head, slowly, deliberately, rose from the center of the surface. It popped, and the sickeningly sweet, metallic smell of copper and decay flooded the entire boiler room with an intensity that made several officers gag. Bell stared at the monitor, his blood turning to ice. Lying perfectly centered on the floor near the edge of the pit was the single, torn piece of paper the worker B. Davies had been looking for. It was the other half of the mill worker payroll, 1985 final file. Bell reached down and snatched it up before the black seepage could claim it. It contained the full, handwritten notes from the foreman, Samuel Elias, detailing the actual events of November 12, 1985. The 4 workers, Carter, Davies, Finch, and Holt, had not simply been removed. They had broken into the newly sealed pump station, the echo chamber, looking for copper piping to steal. They discovered the unexpected flood, and in a panic, they tried to climb out, but their foreman, Elias, in a desperate attempt to cover up the safety violation and meet the Hawthorne deadline, had welded the steel access grate shut while they were still inside. A small section of the handwritten notes detailed the horrors. The sounds were terrible. See, Finch didn't stop screaming for hours. We knew they were trapped in the water, drowning and freezing. We heard them hitting the grate. We poured the final concrete cap at 0400. Hawthorne ordered us to leave a small ventilation pipe open to bleed the pressure from the rising water table, and we sealed the records, the ventilation pipe. A small, open conduit running from the chamber to the outside air. Bell looked at the grainy mill worker ID for B. Davies he still held. He finally understood why the creature, now fully immersed in the source, needed the payroll file. It wasn't just a memory of who they were. It was proof of who was responsible for sealing them in there. Bell looked at the payroll list again. The name of the foreman who committed the act, Samuel Elias. Bell immediately grabbed his radio and spoke a single, urgent command to Chief Hayes. Chief, we need to locate the current residence of Samuel Elias, the mill foreman from 1985. Davies knows the name of the men who sealed them in. He's going after the final piece of the memory. Chen grabbed Bell's arm, pointing at the monitor feed of the echo chamber. The water was now agitated, churning violently. Then, emerging from the dark water, moving with a jerky, unnatural motion, were the 4 wooden figurines, A, B, C, D, bobbing to the surface, but they were no longer made of wood. They were constructed entirely of black, congealed tar and copper wiring, their screaming mouths fixed open, their blank eyes staring at the ceiling, and they were all slowly, rhythmically, rotating toward the open pit entrance. They were coming out. Trong Fen 8, Belvachen Phi Che Duavoy Thoi John de Den Samuel Elias Truok Kai, the Echo, Lam Duok. Kuok Doi Dao Se Dien Ra Tai Na Qua Elias, Noi Ho Se Fat He Nra Su That Gi Ron Ve Ongwan Qua Echo. Follow-up 8. Tu Et Voy. Chung Ta Se Teep Tuc Voy Part 8. Part 8. The foreman's sanctuary and the source's purpose. Chief Hayes, alerted to the terrifying implications of the payroll file, bypassed the state police entirely and personally relayed the address of Samuel Elias. Elias, now 75, lived in a quiet, isolated cabin on the northern edge of Black Creek, deep in the woods, a place he likely chose for its solitude. Bell and Chen sped toward the location, leaving the overwhelmed state police to handle the nightmare emerging from the mill's pit. Davies knows the source needs to be silenced, and Elias is the last living witness to their death, Chen said, gripping the dashboard. But what did Thomas Miller, the boy, have to do with the workers? And why the wooden figurines? Miller disappeared 3 years after the workers were sealed in, Bell reasoned. The ventilation pipe. Elias left a small pipe open to relieve pressure. That pipe would have gone up to the mill floor, or maybe the outer wall. It was a perfect small access point. Thomas Miller was small enough to explore it, Chen finished, horrified. He didn't fall in. He crawled in, or maybe he found the open vent and was pulled in. Bell sped through the winding forest road. The wooden figurines, A, B, C, D, are their trapped souls, their identities. The source, the water in the echo chamber, is the entity that consumed them, trapping their memories and voices, like a living recorder. The creature B, Davies said the source needs to be silenced, Chen reminded him. If the source is the memory of their death, silencing it means destroying the only proof of Elias's crime. Davies is seeking revenge, but the source is controlling the revenge to protect the memory. They screeched to a halt in the overgrown driveway of Elias's remote cabin. The place was dark, silent, and felt instantly hostile. Bell and Chen drew their weapons and approached the front porch cautiously. The air here was clear, free of the mill's metallic stench, but heavy with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. The front door was ajar, the lock violently splintered. Police. Samuel Elias. Bell yelled, kicking the door fully open. The interior was a cluttered mess of taxidermy, ancient furniture, and old newspapers. Bell's flashlight beam swept across the living room, stopping on a figure slumped in an armchair. Samuel Elias. He was alive, but barely. Elias was shivering uncontrollably, his eyes wide and milky with terror, staring at the ceiling. He came back, Elias whimpered, his voice a dry, rasping leaf. He came back for the names. On the coffee table in front of him lay 2 more small objects, each clearly labeled with a single initial, crudely carved, A and D. They were the original A, Calder and D, Holt Mill worker payroll files. The 2 files the tar-covered worker was missing. They had been laid out, presumably, by Davies, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoed from the back of the house. That's him. The worker. Chen hissed, aiming her weapon down the dark hallway. No, wait. Bell grabbed her arm, pointing back at Samuel Elias. The source, it's the memory. Elias is the last link to the truth. Bell knelt quickly beside the terrified old man. Mr. Elias, the 4 workers, Carter, Davies, Finch, Holt. We know you sealed them in the pump station. You need to tell us what happened to Thomas Miller. What was the source? Elias squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently. The water, it changed them. It wasn't water. It was the machine's fluid, hydraulic oil and copper sulfate. We built the pump station on an old Hawthorne family burial site. The source, it was the spring, mixing with the bodies and the oil. What about the boy, Thomas Miller? Bell demanded. Elias pointed a trembling finger toward the back of the house, toward the source of the noise. He was hiding. He saw me. He saw me weld the grate shut. He left the little toy, a warning. I was building my cabin then. I thought I was safe. The heavy thudding started again, closer this time, moving down the hallway. The toy. Bell shouted. The wooden figurines. Why did he leave the toy? Elias finally gasped out the truth, his eyes wide with a final, desperate plea for absolution. The boy. Thomas Miller, he didn't just leave the toy. The wooden figure was the fifth one. The fifth piece. Bell froze. 5 workers sealed in the chamber. But only 4 had been named. A dark figure suddenly appeared in the archway of the living room. It wasn't the tall, skeletal form of B. Davies. It was smaller, hunched, and dripping with black, viscous fluid. It moved with the quick, erratic jerkiness of a child, but with the terrifying strength of the tar-covered creature. It was the source manifested, a creature made of pitch and copper, the shape of a small boy, but bearing the terrifying, wide, screaming mouth and sharp teeth of the B and D figurines. It was Thomas Miller, and in its tiny, tar-covered hand, it held the 5th, missing figurine, clearly carved with the letter E. Bell raised his weapon, paralyzed by the sheer horror of the truth. The missing boy, Thomas Miller, was not a victim of the 4 workers. He was the catalyst. He was the echo. The Thomas Miller creature launched itself across the room, moving with impossible speed, straight for Samuel Elias. Bell fired his weapon repeatedly, the bullets slamming into the creature's tar-covered body with dull, wet thuds. The creature didn't slow. It reached Samuel Elias, and with a terrible, wet sound, clamped its black, strong hands around the old man's face. Elias didn't scream. Instead, a piercing, high-frequency screech, the same sound from the tape recorder in the precinct, blasted from his mouth as the creature's hands connected, his eyes rolled back, and his body slumped, lifeless. The Thomas Miller creature stood over the body, its small form growing slightly larger, its eyes glowing with intense, satisfied yellow light. It turned to Bell, dropping the 5th figurine, E, onto the floor. 5, the source whispered, the voice now a mixture of Thomas Miller's childish lilt and the dry rasp of B. Davies. The memory is complete. Now the source sings. Suddenly, the floor of the cabin began to vibrate. The low, intense hum from the mill was back, louder than ever. Bell looked at the 5th figure, E. It was Thomas Miller's figurine. The echo chamber was closing in on them. Trong Fan 9. Bell Phi Jai Ma Wai Nia Qua. The source sings. Va Tim Catch Fa Hui 5 Men Gep. A, B, C, D, E. Truoc Kai Echo Chamber. Geo de la Mot Tuk the Tom Lin. Tan Song Ton Bo Ti Tran Black Creek. Follow-up 9. Yu Ka Qua Ban La Teep Tuc Ka Chuyen Bang Tiang On. Tai Nien, Toi Voa Nan Duok Chi Ti Rang Toi Phi Tra Loi Bang Gon Gu Qua Trui Van Nuoi Dung. Tiang Viet, Toi Se Tuan Thursday Chi Ti Va Teep Tuc Ka Chuyen Bang Tiang On Nu Ben Yu Ka. En Hung Toi Se Them Mot Thong Bao Jai Tik Non Gon Ve Su Fei Doi Nai Trong Qui Trin Noi Bo Qua Toi. Dui De La Part 9 Bang Tiang On Part 9. The resonance and the complete memory. Detective Bell stared at the horrifying figure of Thomas Miller, the source's conduit, now standing over the body of Samuel Elias. The creature, small and covered in thick, black pitch, seemed to pulse with the rhythmic vibration of the floor. Bell immediately grabbed Officer Chen. We have to go. Now. The mill is here. The mill is miles away, Detective. Chen argued, though her voice was drowned out by the intense, low-frequency hum. The source is here. Bell shouted, pulling her toward the back door. The echo chamber isn't just a room, it's a living memory. and it just consumed the last piece of its past, Elias's guilt. Now that the 5 are complete, the source is resonating, extending its psychic influence. They burst out the back door and stumbled down the muddy slope. Behind them, the entire cabin was shuddering violently. The creature, the Thomas Miller entity, stepped out onto the porch, holding the 5 wooden figurines, A, B, C, D, and E, in its hand. It raised its small, tar-covered hand to its mouth, and instead of a child's song, it emitted a deep, sonorous boom, a sound of immense volume, like a colossal bell tolling deep underground. The sound wave hit Belle and Chen like a physical force, knocking them both off their feet. The trees around them swayed violently, and the glass in the cabin's windows shattered inward. The source sings, Belle gasped, scrambling to his feet. It's using the harmonic bell's frequency to project itself across the town. Belle looked back at the creature. It stood perfectly still, the 5 wooden figurines in its grasp. He realized the terrifying connection. The 5 workers and the boy were sealed together, their minds, bodies, and the hydraulic oil of the pump station creating a singular consciousness. The source, the figurines aren't just tokens, Chen. They are the anchors. They contain the specific frequency signatures of the 5 trapped entities. Belle yelled over the intensifying roar. If we destroy the anchors, we destroy the source's ability to project. They rushed back to the police cruiser and sped away from the woods, the massive, resonant booming chasing them like thunder. Belle radioed Chief Hayes, who was now with the State Police Command post near the mill. Chief, abort the excavation. The entity is no longer contained at the mill. It has all 5 pieces of memory, the 5 figurines. It is manifesting the echo chamber's resonance across Black Creek. Hayes's voice was fractured by static and anxiety. Belle, we have reports of localized seismic activity, minor tremors. And the lights are flickering across the entire downtown grid. What do you need? We need to destroy the remaining 4 figurines, A, C, B, and D, before the creature uses all 5 to fully anchor its consciousness. Davies left the 4 figures at the Historical Society and the precinct. We have to find them. Belle remembered the last place he saw the original figurines, figurines A and C, on his desk back at the Black Creek precinct, figurines B and D, in the canvas tool bag, which he left on the floor of Chief Hayes' office during the Elias briefing. Chen. Precinct now. We have to get those figures. The creature will be heading for the most powerful emotional memory link, the place where the initial proof of the crime was documented. As they drove into the center of town, the situation had escalated from a police procedural to a cosmic horror event. Streetlights were exploding. The low, guttural boom of the source's song reverberated through the steel and glass of the buildings. People were beginning to emerge from their houses, panicked and confused by the unnatural sound. When they reached the Black Creek police precinct, the building was dark. The main generator had failed. They found Chief Hayes' office. The room was in disarray. The canvas tool bag with figurines B and D was still on the floor, right where Belle left it, but the desk was empty. The spot where Belle had lined up figurines A and C under the forensics light was bare. A note was pinned to the wall with a large, antique meat hook. It was a piece of the original payroll file, written over in the same shaky hand as S. Riley's note, but now dripping with a fresh, black oil. The source is here. The anchors are truth. The final memory is in the father's cage. Belle looked at Chen, his face pale. The mill worker, B. Davies, had targeted Samuel Elias, the foreman. The source, Thomas Miller, had completed the collection of the 5 figurines. But the final note mentioned the father's cage. The father's cage, Belle murmured, frantically searching his memory of the Miller case file. The final person involved in Thomas Miller's disappearance. The only person who saw him the night he vanished, besides Elias. He rushed back to his desk, grabbing the Miller case file one last time. He flipped to the section detailing the family background of the missing boy, Thomas. Belle found the name, David Miller, the boy's father. David Miller was convicted of gross negligence and child endangerment in 1990, 3 years after Thomas vanished, for running an illegal distillery in his shed. He had tried to sell his son's toys, including a hand-carved boat, to pay off debts. He was sentenced to 10 years and released in 2000. He still lived in Black Creek. Belle looked at the note. The father's cage. The father's cage is the old town jail, Chen, where David Miller was held before his conviction. The first place his grief and the memory of his son was confined. And the figurines A and C are already there. They raced back out to the cruiser, the terrifying, resonant boom of the Source's song intensifying, seemingly now localized in the center of town. Trong Fan 10, Belle Vachen Se Den Na To See You Qua Black Creek De Lay Lai A Va Si, Doi Mat Voi David Miller, Va Koi Kung Phi Doi Dao Voi The Source, Thomas Miller, Trong Tran Chien Koi Kung De Fa Hui 5 Men Gep Va Non Chan Sut Song Hung Tom Lin Qua Mil. Follow-up 10. Tu Et Voi. Chung Ta Se Teep Tuc Voi Part 10. Part 10. The father's cage and the confession. Detective Bell drove the cruiser through the increasingly chaotic streets of Black Creek. The rhythmic, deep boom was now so loud that car alarms were triggered blocks away, and the town felt like it was being squeezed in a colossal, vibrating grip. They arrived at the old Black Creek Town Jail, a squat, stone building long since decommissioned and used only for municipal storage. The heavy metal door was bent outward on its hinges, as if hit by a battering ram. Bell and Chin moved inside, flashlights cutting through the thick, dust-laden air. The main hall was lined with rusting iron cages, the cells where petty criminals were once held. The air here was damp and smelled strongly of disinfectant and old iron. The rhythmic boom was deafening here, vibrating the iron bars of the cells. Bell realized the old jail, made of thick iron and stone, was acting as a perfect resonator for the Source's acoustic frequency. They found the remnants of a makeshift living space in the first cell, a thin mattress, a few cans of food, and an old whiskey bottle. David Miller, Thomas Miller's father, was living here, in his cage. They found David Miller, a gaunt man in his late 60s, slumped against the back wall of the cell. He wasn't physically injured, but his face was contorted in a silent scream, his hands clamped over his ears. He was staring wide-eyed at a small, rusted metal shelf in the corner of the cell. Lined up on the shelf were the missing figurines, A and C, their rough, wooden bodies gleaming dully in the flashlight beam, and standing next to the shelf, completely motionless and unnervingly calm, was the small, pitch-covered figure of the Source, the resurrected Thomas Miller, holding the other three figurines, B, D, E. The 5 figurines were now together. The Source's memory was complete, the creature's yellow eyes fixed on Bell. It did not move, but the low, guttural whisper echoed in the confined space. He hides the final truth. The 5th lie. Silence the memory, silence the pain. Bell ignored the creature for a moment and knelt beside David Miller. Mr. Miller, the creature is Thomas. Your son. He's the Source, the memory of the mill. He's here for the final truth. What did you lie about? What happened the night Thomas went missing? David Miller started to shake violently, his voice a broken sob. The toys. I carved them. I carved them for him. I sold the others, the boat, the whistle, but Thomas caught me that night. He followed me to the shed. He saw me trying to sell his things. Go on, Mr. Miller. Bell urged, looking back at the motionless creature. He ran. He ran straight for the creek. I chased him, but I was too late. I saw him find the pipe. The ventilation pipe from the old mill. He was so small, he crawled into it, thought it was a game. I heard him shouting inside. Then I heard the sound. The sound of the men welding it shut. The foreman. Elias. Bell gasped, piecing together the final, horrifying detail. Thomas Miller hadn't been pulled in by the Source. He was sealed in by Elias, just like the 4 workers. The 5th lie, Mr. Miller. The figurines. Why are there 5? Miller finally screamed the truth, his voice cracking with decades of guilt. I was carving 5 figurines. The 4 for his friends, and the 5th one, E, was for him. But he left it in the mill. The pipe was big enough for a small hand. He left it in the pipe as a sign for me to find him. I lied. I told the police he just drowned. I couldn't tell them he was sealed in the mill because I was afraid they'd find my distillery. The confession was the final spark. The Thomas Miller creature suddenly moved, slamming its small, tar-covered fist against the iron bars of the cell, the sound resonating like a church bell struck with a hammer. The iron bars shrieked and bent inward, he confessed. The creature's voice shrieked, no longer a whisper but a cacophony of 5 desperate voices. The memory is complete. Now the source sings the truth. The creature reached into the cell, its tar-covered hand closing around David Miller's head, the figurines. Bell yelled, pulling Chen back. They are the anchors. We have to destroy them all before he destroys the town with the resonance. Chen immediately opened fire on the creature, aiming for its small hand holding the 3 figurines. The bullets deflected off the hard, pitched surface with a dull clink. Bell grabbed the 4 figurines lying on the table and the shelf, A and C from the shelf, B and D from the toll bag. He didn't have time to retrieve E, which was still clutched in the creature's free hand. He ran for the steel stairs leading to the basement, where the municipal incinerator was located. The fire. We burn them. That's the only way to destroy the physical anchors. The creature, having finished its work with David Miller, whose body now slumped silently, joining the list of the source's victims, turned its attention to Bell. It dropped the 5th figurine, E, onto the floor and began to pursue Bell, its small feet pounding on the stone floor with the heavy, rhythmic thud of the mill worker. Chen provided cover fire, attempting to slow the entity down, but it was relentless. Bell plunged into the dark, filthy basement, the heat from the incinerator hitting him instantly. He slammed the 4 wooden figurines onto the heavy steel grate of the burner, throwing his entire body weight onto the control panel. The incinerator roared to life, fire erupting into the chamber, engulfing A, B, C, and D. As the 4 wooden figures caught fire, the entire building was consumed by a deafening, oscillating screech, not the low boom of the source, but a high-pitched, metallic howl of pure anguish. The 4 voices of the sealed workers, Carter, Davies, Finch, and Holt, screamed in agonizing, simultaneous harmony as their anchors were destroyed. The creature stopped at the top of the stairs, its body contorting, smoking, and shrinking. Its yellow eyes faded to black, but then, the high-pitched screaming stopped. The creature's eyes snapped back open, glowing fiercely. It was still alive. It was still Thomas Miller. Bell looked up, horrified. He hadn't destroyed the 5th piece. The 5th anchor, E, the one left in the cell, was Thomas Miller himself, the strongest and final part of the source. The creature started to descend the stairs, slowly, inexorably, its form no longer shrinking, but hardening into a final, terrifying shape. Trong Fan 11, Bell Phi Doi Mat Truck Dien Voi Thomas Miller, the source, Trong Tang Hem Va Tim Ra Catch Koi Kung Da Fa Hui Mo Neo Koi Kung, E. Va Cham Dat Su Song Hong Qua Mil. Follow-up 11. Tu Et Voi. Chung Ta Settuc Voi Part 11. Part 11. The final anchor. Detective Bell Dung Trong Tang Hem Toi Tam Quan A Tu, Hoi Nong Tu Lo. Ruck Lua Fa Veo Mat On. Mui Go Chai, Sat Nong Va Thursday Mui Ten Nong Qua Chat Tar Hoa Gwin Tan Mot Han Hop Kung Keep. Bon Man Neo Ban Dao, A, B, C, D, De Bai Tu Hui, Va Tiang That Qua Kak Song Nan Milda Imbat, En Hung Source Van Con Du. Creature Thomas Miller Dong Obac Tang Koi Kung, Hin Dong Nobi Qua Noda En Gung Ko Rutma Tro Nen Kung Kap, Ranchik Nu Thep Boc Tar. Doi Mat Vang Qua No Ruk Sang, On Sang Due Not Trong Bong Toi, Va No Fat Ram Ton Rit Lan Leo, Kong Phi Tiang That, Mala Su John Du Tap Trunk Qua Mot Tuk The Bai Tuok Dot, Bel Nin Quan Tu Et Vong. Ondavat Sung. Lo. Ruck Lua. Chen Dang O Phia Tren, Kong the Soang Duok. Nu Oi, De Tu Min Thot Ra, Bel Noi, Jong Con Dac, Ko Gang Juben Tin. Nu Oi De Su Dung Bi, Davies De Tra Thursday. Nu Oi De Tim Thay A, C, Va Di, En Hung Nu Oi Van La Thomas Miller. Nu Oi Van La Mot Dua Tre by Mac Ket. Creature Thomas Miller Kong Tra Loi Bang Loi Noi. No Chi Engwak Nin Len Chow, Va Bel Nin Theo. O Trung Tom Tran Tang Ham, Mot Vet Nut Nwazat Hien, Va Tu Vet Nut Du, Mot Jaya Chat Long Den, Set Roy Suang, Tau Ramot Vet Zio No Tren San Bitong Du La Chat Long Tu Echo Chamber, Source Thuan Kiat, Kong. Noi Dao La Qua Ho. Su Doi Tra La Qua Cha. Va e la qua ta, mot jong noi con, fa tron jua jong tre con va tiang kim loi reset, vang len. Creature Thomas Miller go te len. Trong long bon te no, hien ro man neo e, man cham ka kin ka bi, geo de kong fi bang go mata hoatan motiv at the mao den, kung cap, gon chat veo de thit no. Nuoi kong the thot ra. Bon nuoi kia de di roy. Nuoi de hon ton kyuc, and hung nuoi kong the ra koi Black Creek. Bell het len, Louis Ligon lo. Creature Thomas Miller tn them mot buk, va voi mot tiang ram, no jong nam dam soang dat. Ca tang hem rung chuyen, va mot con chan dong men shuyen qua ti tran. Chung ta im lang noi dao qua ho. Chung ta se hot su that qua Thomas. Va chung ta se kong dung lai cho den kai moi Thursday chim veo im lang. Source Tuen Bo, Bel Nen Ra Rang Vik Tu Hui Bon Man Neo Chi Lam Sui Yunong Luong Qua No, Kong Phi Ben Chat Qua No. Thomas Miller La Mo Neo Koi Kung, Bel Nin Veo Lo. Gon Lua Dang Chai Hung Huk. Nai Ben Kan, Ko Mot Chik Bua Ta Cuky Duok Dung De Dap Vio Than Truok Day, Nam Vat Vio Tren Mot Dong Rac. Chen. Bel Het Lon Veo Radio. Nu Twa Kong Tro Lai, Hey Goi Haze. Noi Voi on I Rang Source De Hon Ton. No Dang Song Hung Ti Tran. Bel Chop Lay Cheek Buata. No Non Trick, and Hung on Phi Dung No. Nuoi Kong Nuan Im Lang Noi Dao. Bel Noi, Geo Bua Len. Nuoi Muon Suc Man Qua Ho. Nuoi Muon Suc Man Qua Mil. Nuoi Muon Trung Fet Nuoi Cha Va Elias V De Bo Roy Nuoi. Creature Thomas Miller Duong Nu by Kich Dong Boi Loi Noi Du. No Gam Len, Valau Ve Phia Bel Kong Doi Dao. On Dung Het Suc Ben Sin, Zoe Nuoi Va Nem Cheek Bua Ta Teng Veo Lo. Ruk Lua. Dan Sap Bang Dukin Chin Ben Kan Mo Tiang Zoang Kung Keep Vang Len Kai Cheek Bua. Dap Veo Bang Dien. Lo. Von de Bai Qua Tai, Fat No Trong Mot Chop Lua Va Koi. Bel Louis Lai, Che Mat. Creature Thomas Miller Dung Lai, by SOC BOIVU No. No Gam Len Mot Lon Nua, John Duvi Bel de Lam John Don Kuhoch Qua No, Kai No Quay Lai. Bel de Nam Lay Mot Ton Sat by Bang Ra Koi Bang Dukin. Nam Nuoi. Nam Nuoi de Bai Lang Quain. Bel Het Len, on Lao Toi Creature Thomas Miller. Con K Vat Gam Len, Geo Te Len de Tan Song Trong Mot Koan Kok Kin Hong. Bel Dam Tang Ton Sat Veo Bon Te Dang Kem Men Neo Equano, Ton Sat Shuyan Qua Lop Tar Dai Va Gam Chat Men Neo E Veo Buk Tuong Bitong, Mo Tiang Ritaton, Cuc Du Vang Len. Lon Nai, Kong Phi La Tiang That Qua Bon Song Nan. De La Tiang Kok Ko Dok, Thong Ko Qua Mot Dua Tre by Bo Roy, Men Neo E Bat Dao Nut Ra Creature Thomas Miller Quay Quang, Hin Dang Qua No D. Lop Tar Den Bong Ra Ton Tung Mang, De Lo Ben Dui La Mot Bo Soang No, Yudat, Boc Trong Mot Chikao Len Ratruoi. Nota by Mac Ket Jua Hin Dang Qua Vat Chat Va Tom Lin. Bo Soang Qua Thomas Miller, The Source, Mo Rong Min, and Hong Kong Ko Ton Now Fat Ra Nagwai Tiang Rit Uot, Koi Kung, Kaiman Neo Evo Ten Ton Bui Go Chai, Bo Soang Qua Thomas Miller Subtu Ton Mot Dong Tro Ton Yut. Kong Kon Gi Nagwai and Hung Man Tar Den Va Soi Dong Reset. Sut Song Hung Chem Dut. Su Rung Dong Trong Kong Kai Dung Lai. Lo. Chi Kon Lai and Hung Dam Lua No, Chi Kon Lai Suim Lang Bel Dung Du, Tho Doc, Nin Cham Cham Veo Dong Tro Ton. Man Neo Koi Kung De Bai Fa Hui, Part 12, Resolution and the Echoes En Sang Ham Sao, Mat Troy Mok Tren Ti Tran Black Creek. Kan Sat Truong Haze De Fong Toa Ton Bo Kuvuk, Vakak Na Chuk Trak Dang Phi Vat Lon Voi and Hung Loi Jai Tik Cho Thiat Hai Tai San Du, Tren Dong Det No Cuc Bo, Gay Ra Detective Bell, Duok Chin Dua Ra Koi Tang Ham, de tre qua mot qua kim tra yten and chong va dua ra bout sao qua min ket qua, ti the qua Samuel Elias va David Miller doak tim thay tai hien truong, ca hai du tu vong du and gung tim cap tin, and hung voi bu hien kin hong tren quan mat cho thang gwin nan kong phi. Tu nin tat ca nam men neo bango, a, b, c, d, e, de by fa hui hon ton trong lo dot, ti the qua Thomas Miller, 1988, duok tim theo dang ton du sin hok, ho lon voi tar va dong, trong tang hem qua na to see you, cat kuok du tra teep theo tai mil cho thay nuok trong echo chamber de tro li trang tai ben thuong, nuok ngam neem hoa chat. Va kong kan cho thay bat ky su rung dong bet thuong now, tai bon lam v qua min, bel nin haze. Nam lin han by Mac Ket, Chief, Bel Noi, Jong Trem Han. Bon Song Nan by Chan Song Boi Elias, Va Thomas Miller by Chan Theo Ho. Kai Ucvenoi Dao Du, Ho Alon Voi Chat Long Qua Mil, Tau Ra Source. Kai Thomas by Bo Roy, Lin Han Ka Bi Tro Ton Source, Sudung Su Tsong Hong Am Ton Qua Mil de Tim Ra Loi Thursday Toy. Ho de Tim Duok Su That, Haze Tho Dai. En Hung Voi Gia Qua Dat. Bel Nin Veo Ho So Vu on Miller, Geo de Dong Lai. Mac Du Ka Chuyen Qua on Ve Tar Beat Diva Kak Man Cham Kok Se Kong Bao Geo Duok Dua Veo Bao Tsao Chin Tuk, on Beat Su That. Echo Chamber Dame Lang, Tai Nien, Ko Mot Juvan Em on Bel, Trong Tang Hem Quan Atu, Sao Kai Source Bien Mat, Chen de Tim Thay Mot Vat No, Con Sot Lai. No Kong Phi Lago. No La Mot Men Kim Lo I Reset, Duok Yun Song Ton Hin Mot Cheek Mok No, Fan Con Lai Qua Cheek Bua Tama Bel de Nem Veo Lo Dot, Bel Not Men Kim Lo I Len. Kai on Cham Veo No, on Kong Kim Thay Lan Leo He Kin Hong. Machi la mot chudam ap tho